Brutus of Troy was a figure of illustrious lineage and was said to descend from the Greek goddess Aphrodite. His ancestry can be traced back to the Trojan hero Aeneas, the son of Anchises and Aphrodite. Aeneas, who escaped the destruction of Troy, fled carrying his broken father and became the leader of a group of Trojan exiles who fled their land and went to Italy. Aeneas had a son named Ascanius, who was the father of Silvius. Silvius had a son who was named Brutus. And so, while Brutus of Trojan lineage was born in Italy, he was prophesied and destined to be the ruler of a new land. Indeed, there was much prophesied about Brutus long before he was even born. Silvius consulted a sorcerer while his wife was pregnant. He wished to know the gender of his unborn child. The sorcerer revealed that Silvius would have a boy, and of that he was right. But that was not the only thing that the sorcerer would reveal. He revealed that this boy would travel through many countries, liberating many Trojan exiles and achieving many great deeds. But this boy would also be responsible for the death of both his parents. Silvius had the sorcerer killed, for heresy, for dishonour, but mostly out of fear. How could his son, who would do so much for the people of Troy, start with the death of his parents? However, his wife died giving birth to that son, and the boy was named Brutus. And when he neared the age of 15, whilst out one afternoon tracking deer, Brutus spied a magnificent stag. Holding his bow steady, he let loose an arrow and it hit flesh, but it was not the flesh of the stag. His father staggered out from behind a bush, the arrow having pierced his neck. Silvius wanted to say something, but instead he fell forward and died on the floor of that Italian forest. It is hard to say whether Brutus fled or was exiled, but it would seem that the seer had been proved correct, and the next part of his prophecy was just about to begin. 3 years later, Brutus, nearly a man, travelled through Greece. Despite his fantastical heritage, he was regarded as no more than another beggar, an unwanted refugee. Brutus, feeling an urge to be with his people, encountered a group of Trojans living in slavery. The king of Greece, Pandrasus, had enslaved all descendants of Helenus, the almost mythical seer of the land of Troy and a great augur. It was said that he was captured by Pyrrhus as punishment for the death of his father Achilles in the Trojan War. Brutus, seeing his people being treated as nothing more than cattle, longed to see them free. He becomes their leader and promises a better life for them. A noble named Asarchus, owner of many castles and secretly of Trojan descent through his mother, has his castle seized after his half-brother is allowed to by the king. Brutus cuts a deal with Asarchus, gathers all the Trojan slaves and turns all of Asarchus' towns into strongholds. Brutus, his newfound army, and Asarchus disappear into the woods. Writing a letter to the king, he asks for clemency. He asks that he and his Trojans be freed from the bondage of slavery, that they are allowed to live in peace in the woods or to leave Greece peacefully. The note is tied to the foot of a speckled dove and set free to find the king. Brutus did not expect clemency, and he did not expect peace. Once a tyrant, always a tyrant. He got men and women prepared. King Pandrasus does not fly into a rage. He was somewhat intrigued. Who was this young upstart who was so bold as to defy his king? He declared to the council he would meet this boy, if nothing for the sake of curiosity. Naturally, the boy would be killed as an example to the Trojan rabble, along with half of those slaves. The rest would be sent back to their masters on pain of death. Pandrasus sends his brother with an army to besiege the town of Spartanum, known for its plentiful forests and wooded areas. They were to burn it to the ground and try and bring this upstart back alive. But he would understand if accidents happened. The Greek battalion marched. In full battle regalia, they felt that this would be comparable to rounding up and killing vermin. As they traversed through a heavily wooded area, Brutus and 3,000 men ambushed the Greek army. The Trojans were familiar with the woods and the Greeks were not. The Greek army is slain almost to the man. The Greeks in complete disarray attempt to retreat. Brutus captures the king's brother and one of his lieutenants, Anacletus, and retreats back into the woods, leaving 600 men to reinforce the town of Spartanum. Upon hearing this, the king's curiosity turned to anger. Rallying reinforcements, he immediately surrounds the town. He brings along his daughter in Gog. She would need to see what happens to those that oppose him and his house. Whoever this Brutus was, he who could turn slave into soldier, would serve as his personal slave or endure years of torture before death. The night descends, doing nothing to change the stalemate. Brutus, emerging from the wooded clearing behind the Greek army, brings along Anacletus. He instructs the man to claim he has escaped, to divert the night sentries away. If he so much as deviates one iota, he would slay the king's brother without a second thought. With hands tied, he's given an unceremonious boot in the backside and stumbles his way to the Greek settlements. The sentries are coaxed away, and then darkness descends once more on the sleeping Greek army. Only now it is Brutus and his army. The Greeks are killed quickly and without remorse. Brutus has but one request: do not kill the king or any of the women. After a night of butchery, the king is brought to Brutus and thrown to the ground. A lithe woman follows in tow. Brutus looks at her with interest and smiles. Brutus, young, youthful, powerful, and with fire within him, looks down at the king. Pandrasus, old, fat, and pitiful, holds his hands up before him, pleading for mercy. How does one such as this become king, where he who was born from the gods themselves, is not? Consulting his council, they ask what to do. Some of them want to kill the king outright and take the woman, for she was the daughter of the king. Brutus could understand them wanting justice, driven from their land to be sold into slavery, but he also knew that they would never leave Greece alive. The king may be fat, old, and of low worth, but he was powerful and useful. Brutus explains that they will use him to buy their freedom, with enough ships and resources that they will never be slaves again. They could not return to their homeland, but they would find a new place. He would see the sun once again rise over his people. Brutus commands Pandrasus that he will comply with their demands. He will give them what they want, or he would throw him to the people and they would pull him apart with their bare hands. That he would set him adrift back to Greece once he was sure they were safe.
Yes, anything you say, O Brutus of Troy.
There is just one more thing I want of you.
Name it, whatever you desire, it shall be yours.
Brutus points at the lithe young woman, the daughter of King Pandrasus.
Her.
As Brutus sets out from Greece, Gogmagog, who he claimed as his wife, weeps. He allows her to weep until no more tears remain, where she then seems to fall into a slumber. Brutus catches her and embraces her with the tenderness of Venus herself. With his wife asleep in his arms, he looks about him. In command of a powerful fleet, armed Trojans, and a people looking hopeful to the future and the new world ahead. Whilst out at sea, they encounter a deserted island. No one occupied the island, but there lay a great temple within the centre. Upon entering the temple, they find it is dedicated to the goddess Diana, Mercury, and Jupiter. Long abandoned, Brutus hopes he can find signs of guidance. As the evening ushered in, light from the torches flickered across the marble beauty of Diana. Taking 12 of his most trusted soldiers, he performs the ritual. Going on a hunt, they bring back a stag of the purest white and slaughter it by cutting its throat. Blood darker than red spills into a bowl and mingles with wine. 4 times he circles the altar of the goddess, pouring the offering onto the hearth. With the bowl drained, he utters an invocation.
Goddess of woods, tremendous in chase, to mountain board and all the savage race, look upon us on earth, we bow at your feet, and say what region is our destination seat.
The night air is clear and dark, yet the flames of torches flicker and spit. Brutus falls at the feet of the goddess and goes to sleep. While they all sleep, the eyes of the statue comes to life and looks down on this man. Who were these men, and who was this man? It had been oh so long since she had been worshipped. Even as the ships came to the beach, she only half awakened, expecting nothing more than pirates. But this, the ceremony, and this man, handsome and athletic for a mortal, but there's something more about him. A man of destiny and something else. He wasn't quite mortal, he was like her, as of the gods themselves. She imposed herself on him and entered his dreams. So what if he was a man of destiny? She wanted him here with her. She would grant him the gift of immortality, that they would be together forever. He had the blood of gods within him, but that mortal warmth would soothe her for an eternity. But the further she went into the psyche of this man, the more she tried to seduce, to find a chink in his armour. She was countered by the force of his will. There was nothing that would deter him from his destiny, and so she spoke to him in his dreams. She showed him a distant and fertile land, impossibly green but surrounded by walls of the purest white, a land called Albion. But the land was not uninhabited, it was populated with giants, and while their number was few, the strength of them was formidable. They would not let this island be taken easily, and they were led by the mightiest of all giants, Gogmagog. In his dream, Brutus is drifting down a lake as effortlessly as a leaf. The sky is bright and magnifies off those crystal waters. It's impossible to notice anything else, and he is not alone. The goddess glides down with him. She whispers into his ear everything about Albion, of the giants, and what comes after. Brutus sits upright. This is the sign he was looking for. A morning mist was creeping into the temple just as the sun began to break over the horizon. He looked at the effigy. It stood as unmoving as he had found it. Gathering his men, he leaves the island and the temple and sets sail once more. Fending off pirates and sirens, Brutus encounters another band of exiled Trojans along the shores of the Tyrrhenian Sea. These new Trojans are led by the prodigious warrior known as Corineus. When Brutus encounters him, he finds a heavy-set man with thick muscles either side of his neck and a short sun-bleached haircut on a head carved out of stone. Despite his imposing presence, Corineus was a clever military strategist. He saw in Brutus a man of great integrity and swore fealty to him. The two bands united, and Brutus makes Corineus his second in command. They set sail once more for the land promised to him. Despite the visions, despite the prophecies, Brutus knew that this man would prove crucial in the challenges ahead. Eventually the fleet reached Gaul. While Brutus knew that this new land lay further north, they had to restock for provisions. Brutus dropped anchor and deployed parties to seek supplies. Corineus personally took one party and immediately set about hunting game and gathering fresh water. It was not long before the king of Aquitaine, Gaufarius Pictus, heard of armed men in their forests. He sent emissaries to make contact and asked what the men wanted. The emissaries soon found Corineus and 200 men in the forest and demanded who they thought they were, to take without revealing themselves or asking permission. Corineus was an uncompromising man and did not suffer fools. He informed the emissaries that he would go where he wished and take what he wanted. A young man named Brutus did not like what he heard, and raising his bow, sought to bring this brute down. Corineus caught the shaft of the arrow in full flight in a meaty hand, snapping the arrow like a twig. Advancing on Brutus, he snatched the heavy bow out of his hand, and with a speed that was surprising for a man his size, swung the bow back into the side of the man's head, instantly killing him. The emissaries flee back to the king and inform him of the death of Brutus and the warlike men that now hunted with impunity in the forests. Gafaris would not let mere barbarians do as they please and marched on the Trojans with haste. Brutus, catching word of this, ordered the women and children back to the ships with a skeleton crew of trusted soldiers to guard them and set sail in the worst case scenario. Brutus, Corineus and the majority of the Trojan soldiers met the Gaulish army and a great battle ensued. In the melee, Corineus slew many a Gaul but broke his broadsword along the way. Picking up a hefty battle axe, he cleaved through dozens of men and no one could stand against his ferocity. The Trojans were victorious and Brutus collected up every scrap of armour and weapon to be taken back to the ships. Aquitaine was subsequently sacked. Brutus knew that Gaul was vast and another army would be sent, 2 or 3 times bigger this time, and would be sent continuously. The Trojans were mighty, but they could not fight indefinitely, and Gafaris would not stop until the Trojans were either driven out or put to the sword. Brutus constructed a fortified encampment. If it came to it, they would hold off Gafaris as long as it took in order to allow the ships to leave. Gafaris indeed summoned an army 3 times the size of the first one. He intended to squash this resistance where it stood. The encampment was attacked, but the defence proved too strong for the time being. To Gafaris, if they could not tear this fortress down, they would surround it and starve them out. Brutus, Corineus and the Trojan council held a meeting. Corineus and his men would sneak around the enemy during the night and when dawn came, would attack the Gauls from the east. At the same time, Brutus and his men would erupt from the fortress and attack the Gauls from the west. The ships were well stocked and if they failed, at least the fleet would reach the promised land. However, the Gauls, unprepared for this flanking move, were utterly destroyed by the Trojans. Despite the victory, Brutus lost his nephew, Turnus. Brutus knew that they would have to leave now or they would start to lose more men. No matter how hard they fought, the Gauls would just throw more and more men at them. Turnus was placed on a stretcher and they left the fortress, knowing it would buy them some time, headed for the ships and made their run for Albion. On that channel of water, a cold mist glided across the surface, creating an eerie silence. Brutus thought he could hear whispers within the fog, sirens or perhaps the echoes of something from the past. As the mist broke, the fleet saw huge white cliffs and Brutus knew that this was the land he was destined to find. For a moment he thought he saw a figure standing on that cliff, something large. A tendril of mist passed his face and the figure was gone. As the ships approached the beach, they saw another ship dashed against the shoreline. Decrepit and ancient, algae and limpets covered this ghost ship. Brutus found it curious, a relic from the east. It would seem he was not the first to come here. Coming ashore, Brutus, carrying his dead nephew in his arms, stands along that coast and declares, "Here I stand and here I rest, and this town shall be called Totnes." Brutus knew that before any sort of infrastructure could be put in place, there was the small matter of the giants. The land was as Diana had foretold, cold but fertile and green. Wild and untamed, it would make a fine country for civilization. Plentiful with game and resources, an island was perfect. It was easy to protect, surrounded by the vastness of an ocean. Brutus immediately set out to explore the landscape. Areas would become towns and towns would become kingdoms. A few solitary giants were discovered and they were easily dispatched due to the superior experiences that the Trojan army had endured during their time together. Brutus was not sure why it was called Albion. Perhaps it was the name of a giant or the owner of that ship. It mattered not. This land would be known as Britain, named after himself, or was he not destined to find this place? For his help in Brutus's quest, Corineus was offered the west part of the island. Corineus named this region Cornea, which would one day become known as Cornwall. From a distance, a huge giant observed and waited. He had been here for millennia. He and his king had built temples and monuments that sung to the stars. temples that would remain long after these invaders would be dust. Let them become comfortable, let them become lax. When the time comes, he and his brothers would crush them. He smashed a fist into the palm of his hand, and a crack of thunder rumbled across the land. After many months, Brutus and his people gathered at the new town of Totnes. They would engage in a festival celebrating Britain in honour of the gods and fallen comrades. All seemed joyous for the new Britons when suddenly the ground trembled. By the gods, was this an earthquake? They looked to the west and saw a huge dust cloud that seemed to stretch to the heavens. What they saw come out of that dust cloud astounded even Brutus himself. Enormous giants came bounding along. Some were carrying tree trunks as clubs. Some were riding on huge hairy elephants and rhinos that reminded Brutus of those days in the Colosseums, exotic beasts from the southern lands. But they were here, bigger, hairier, and carrying enormous giants.
"Defend yourselves, my Britons!"
cried Brutus. The giant army smashed into the Trojans in a quite literal sense. Trojans were trampled under beast and foot alike. Men were sent flying in one direction with one swipe of a club, and sent flying in another direction with a giant palm of a hand. These giants seemed to stand 20 cubits or more. Brutus thought of ancient stories, how the gods themselves had to fight terrifying beings known as Titans. One ugly brute with a lumpy face charged at Brutus. Without thinking, Brutus threw his sword with all his might. It pinwheeled through the air and skewered this beast through the eye. The giant cried in pain and crashed to the floor. So, these things could be killed. Brutus quickly rallied the soldiers and with superior numbers, speed and tactics, started to pick the giants off one by one. Some giants fled in a panic, but one did not. This was the largest of them all. He had a tree trunk in one hand and a mammoth tusk in the other. 100 arrows must have landed on him, and he dusted them off as a man might if he were covered in pollen. This giant was Gogmagog, and he was the leader of the giants and the ruler of Albion. Dropping his weapons, he would tear every one of these men apart with his bare hands. His foot crashed on men here, his hand backhanded some there. He roared to the skies and spoke in a tongue that was completely alien to the men of Troy. He brought his fist down and was amazed to find it had been halted. To his amazement, a man stood under that fist, holding it back with all his might. Gogmagog pushed harder. This man dug in, his huge thighs bulging as he attempted to halt this bludgeon. Gogmagog relinquished and stood back. He looked down and saw a large mortal. This mortal unfastened his armour until just his loincloth and boots remained. He was heavily muscled with a short haircut and eyes that burned with a thirst for combat, something that the giant understood. Man and giant circled each other, and then charged. Despite the strength of this man, Gogmagog was still stronger. He barreled over this man. Corineus immediately somersaulted back to his feet. Running around the back of the giant, he embraced him in a reverse bear hug, and pulling with all his might, threw the giant onto his back. The ground trembled with the impact. Gogmagog was in disbelief, and before he knew what was happening, Corineus delivered a boot to the temple. For a moment, the giant's eyes rolled. Snapping out of it, he lashed out at the mortal. This mortal was strong and fast, but Gogmagog not only possessed superior strength, but range and reach. He embraced Corineus in a bear hug and squeezed. Corineus felt a rib break. The giant pressed home his advantage. Another rib broke. Then another. Corineus managed to pull his arms from out of that hug and delivered 2 chops to the giant's thick neck. Again, and again, and again. The giant dropped the mortal man and staggered back. The The two adversaries were dangerously close to the edge of the white cliff. Corineus saw that this would be his only chance. He ran to the giant and hoisted his giant frame onto his shoulders. He walked as close as he could to the edge and, squatting his legs for a moment, thrust upwards, pushing his arms and propelling his mighty opponent. The giant spun in the air and was dashed over the edge, crashing into the rocks below before rolling into the ocean's swell, which began to turn red. With the land free of giants, Brutus decided to create a new city and travelled through the country to find a site. Along a stretch of water known as the Thames, Troy Nova was created. Over time it would evolve, become Trinovantum, and later Caer Lud, and finally London. Those citizens of his that lived in the city he created laws for so that they could live in peace and justice. Brutus lived a long and happy life, but eventually old Father Time caught up with him. He was survived by 3 sons known as Corineus, Albinactus and Camber. After a rule of 24 years, Brutus was buried in Troy Nova. Corineus continued to rule over Cornwall, with the rest of this land being divided into 3 parts, and each would be governed by one of Brutus's sons. Corineus ruled an area that was named Logria. While Cornwall was a part of this land, it had its own independent rule. Over time, Logria would become England. Albinactus would rule over Albany, which would later become Scotland, and Campbell ruled over the rest of Britain, which would be known today as Wales. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, a long line of rules would descend from Brutus for around 2,000 years, until the 7th century, when the first of the Anglo-Saxons would arrive. Brutus might have turned a wilderness into a civilization, but there were giants already present. Brutus never knew how they came to be, and while the giants were killed and driven into the earth, it was not the last time that giants would be seen. Nor would this be the last of Gogmagog. It would be centuries later that Gog would appear again to a Norman knight in Wales and tell him the story of the time before the Trojans and of the murderous queen that had once lived there. Indeed, stories of Gogmagog and giants are even found in the book of Ezekiel, with Gog being an individual and Magog as his land. In Revelations, Gog and Magog are associated with the forces of evil that will rise against God's people in the end times. Consequently, the identity of Gogmagog has been subject to much speculation and interpretation throughout history, which serves as a reflection of the geopolitical context of different eras. Giants in the Bible are often described as extraordinary powerful beings that have included the Nephilim, Anakim and Raphim, with Goliath serving as one of the more memorable ones. In other mythology, the conflict between gods, men and giants has always been present, symbolising the struggle between order and chaos. In Greek mythology, the giants were descended from the blood of Uranus. It has seemed that giants have always existed in one culture or another, and that they have always had some direct link with divinity in some form. And British folklore has been replete with giants. Gogmagog was an inhabitant of what we know today as Cornwall, famous for his battle with Brutus of Troy and Corineus. Today, effigies of Gog and Magog appear as 2 giants carried before the Lord Mayors of the City of London each year on the 2nd Saturday of November in a procession known as the Lord Mayor's Show. 1709, 2 figures were carved from pine by Captain Richard Saunders and displayed in Guildhall, London until 1940, when they were destroyed in an air raid. They were later replaced in 1953. The town of Totnes is also a very real town found at the head of the estuary of the River Dart in Devon. Legend of course says that Totnes is the first place that Brutus came ashore when he discovered Britain. And in Totnes lies the Brutus Stone, a small granite boulder said to mark the spot where he first set foot in Britain. It is embedded in a pavement on Fore Street near number 51. Originally standing around 18 inches tall, when the street was widened in 1810 it was reduced to pavement level. As the stone is far inland from the tidal line, the suggestion that this is where Brutus first trod is symbolic rather than literal. Today, the stone remains a civic landmark with local traditions holding that royal proclamations are read from it by the mayor. The stone will always serve as a reminder of the bravery, courage and fighting spirit of Brutus and the Trojans, something deep within the DNA of the British today. If you have liked today's episode, please be sure to leave a like and review. It helps others find their way back to those chalk white cliffs. And so ends our story of the origins of Albion that later became Britain. And while Britain is indeed great, we shall leave it to you to decide if it is greater than Albion was. And with that marks the end of Season 1 of Mythic Albion. I hope you have enjoyed walking along the hidden paths of Albion and discovering the many legends, folktales and magic of this land. And while the path might end here in what we know today as Britain, the story will continue. Mythic Albion will return later this year in the autumn, across the Atlantic Ocean, where we change our region entirely. So until then, walk wisely and beware the sound of an incoming giant stampede.